I'm Jethro Heiko. I'm the founder of Philadelphia Parents for Palestine. And the proud father of two awesome Philadelphia high school students. I want to thank the amazing group, Philadelphia Educators for Palestine, for welcoming my family into their efforts early in 2024, and to thank the founding members of Philadelphia Parents for Palestine. So far, with many of you, we've mobilized, we've rallied, we've protested, and we've testified at school board meetings. We have taken actions that resulted in the school board shutting down their meeting last fall, 1 month after they cowardly removed Keziah Ridgway from teaching. Shame. This school year, Keziah was reinstated and is teaching at a different high school. This victory shows that through solidarity, and taking action, we do make a difference. I want to thank everyone who signed our petition, who tirelessly persisted and stood up for getting her back in the classroom where she belongs. If you are a current or future parent of school children in Philly, please visit our table during reception to connect with us and sign up to learn about an upcoming potluck at our home. We'd love to have you. As you know, tonight's event is also a fundraiser. All funds that exceed the event's production costs will be donated to 3 specific groups. The first, Care Philadelphia, has been a supporter of our group from the beginning, and I want to thank them very much for that support. In addition, proceeds will go to the Palestinian Youth Movement organization and to Biodair Youth Team. Mohammed of the youth team sent a message to us to deliver to you from Gaza. I'd like to read this message, which he asked us to share with you. He writes, "We've been forced to leave Gaza under the threat of relentless, indiscriminate bombing everywhere in Gaza City. There is extreme overcrowding on the trucks. Some of us managed to leave, while others are still under bombardment and destruction, waiting for a truck to take them into the unknown in the Mawasi area, which is already overcrowded and has no space. My message to all free people of the world: do not leave us alone. Please try to help us in any way, even if only by speaking about the genocide we are enduring, an unprecedented war of extermination through social media. We also affirm that we will continue our work and help displaced people wherever we may be. Pray for us." Now I'd like to introduce Reverend Hannah Capaldi. Did I get that right? Capaldi? All right. Yes, Reverend Hannah from the Unitarian Society of Germantown. The Society has welcomed all of us during a time of increasing censorship, and it means so much to us that you have opened your doors to us. Reverend Hannah.
It's so good to be with all of you tonight. I see so many familiar faces in the crowd, and it warms my heart. I'm honored to welcome you to the Unitarian Society of Germantown. I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi. I serve this congregation as its minister. And you might think that means that I am very cool, calm, and collected tonight. But in fact, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed to have these people in my chancel soon, have these people in my pulpit. I'm a little honored, excited, and a bit intimidated. I'll let you know that my office was the green room for this event, and all I could think as I prepared my remarks was, they're going to be looking at my bookshelves. Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor is looking at my bookshelves. I'd rather she read my journal. and I just loaned out my Fanon. But let it be known, my shelf is usually clogged with Fanon. So this is a big deal to me, and it's a big deal for this congregation, which is still in formation, still on the road to becoming, to embodying the kind of anti-racist, liberatory community we strive to be. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people, that you are born of original blessing, not of original sin, and that you are destined for good things, that God wants good things for you. And if you are finding yourself a bit uncomfy in a pew, staring at some stained glass and hymnals, that's fine, I get it. But let me tell you a bit about why I offered to host this here tonight. In the 1960s, the minister here, Reverend Max Dascom, didn't fancy himself much of a preacher. So he created a series called The Ecumenical Pulpit, in which he offered his sermon slot to some of the greatest critical minds of his era: Howard Thurman, Paul Tillich, Reinhold Niebuhr, and one Martin Luther King Jr., who preached from this pulpit in 1960. We've got a plaque right here commemorating his appearance, and I try to find a way when I get up here to channel the most radical King. I try to remember the way he was when he declared that we as a society must undergo a radical revolution of values if we are to uproot the giant triplets of evil: racism, militarism, and economic exploitation. So it was from this pulpit that MLK preached about a single garment of destiny into which we are all woven, a network of mutuality, one that cannot be realized until we uproot the triplets of evil: racism, militarism, and capitalism, all at work, all at play in the destruction of Palestine, all at work, all at play in the genocide happening now, at the deprivation of dignity that's been happening for far, far too long. All at work. The racism, the militarism, and the capitalism that we work here with spiritual discipline and fervent hope to uproot in our own lives and in the communities we hold so dear. So welcome to the Unitarian Society of Germantown, and welcome to our esteemed panel, who are some of our greatest critical minds of this era, inheriting their place in our ecumenical pulpit. So know that the work of liberating Palestine will always have a home here. Welcome tonight.
Thank you so much, Reverend Hannah. It's really great to be here. Just a couple last things. We want to thank 2 restaurants for feeding us tonight. Donations are being provided by Renata's for our reception that follows. And the childcare room is having amazing pizza from Pertuco, who's donated pizzas for the children. Thank you. I likely missed people and groups to thank, but thank you all. Really appreciate all the support we've had over the last year and a half. All right. I'd now like to introduce you to Arun Kundnani. He always is wearing a fabulous tracksuit, and he'll be moderating the panel this evening. Like me, Arun is a father and a member of Philadelphia Parents for Palestine. Unlike me, he's an accomplished scholar and educator. He's the author of What is Anti-Racism? And the Muslims Are Coming. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the discussion.
Okay, good evening, everyone. How are you all doing? Okay, so 50 years ago, the United Nations General Assembly, representing the majority of the people of the world, passed UN Resolution 3379, which defined Zionism as a form of racism. And we're here tonight to learn about the hidden history of that moment, to commemorate that achievement, and understand its significance for our struggles today. Now, that resolution was about connections. In saying that Zionism is a form of racism, it recognized that there's a solidarity between the Palestinian cause and other anti-racist struggles. In South Africa against apartheid, against European colonialism in other parts of the world, and against white supremacy here in the United States. And tonight is about tracing those connections between the genocide in Gaza and anti-Palestinian racism in the United States, connections between Gaza City and our own city of Philadelphia, connections between the past and the present. We're going to remember people like Fred Dube, a black South African activist who spent time in a Robben Island jail cell under apartheid before coming to the United States to teach at Stony Brook University, and where in 1987 he lost his job because he tried to educate his students about the UN resolution on Zionism. We're going to honor our educators who for decades have been vilified and victimized for teaching the truth about Palestine. And we celebrate our brave students who are hungry to learn, to agitate, to organize. Today, the Zionist racism that was recognized by the UN General Assembly 50 years ago has been fully unleashed. As we witness this week the annihilation of Gaza City, and we ask, what can we do? We say that solidarity does not only mean empathy for the plight of Palestine or raising awareness about what is happening there. It means also tracing the ways that Palestinian liberation entwines with our liberation struggles here in Philadelphia. It means understanding that Israel trains our militarized cops, installs surveillance technologies to intercept migrants, supplies the methods used by police departments to spy on Muslim communities. It means recognizing that the struggle against Zionist colonialism is connected to the struggles against colonialism in Sudan, in Congo, in Kashmir, in Venezuela. These are terrifying times. Wherever we look, the pain we carry grows greater day by day. Every day brings some new authoritarian measure. But we also know that more powerful than their repression is our ability to unite together. As Reverend Hannah said, 65 years ago, Martin Luther King stood on this very platform and told the audience that we are tied in a single garment of destiny, an inescapable network of mutuality. As long as there is poverty in this world, he said, you can never be totally rich, even if you have $1 billion. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the way the world is made. And that's why we're here, because we understand that our struggles are connected in that garment of destiny. And when we can bring this number of people together, we know that this city won't be intimidated. We know that when they come for our teachers, we're going to be strong enough to fight back. When they come for our brave young students, we're going to be strong enough to fight back. When they try to erase black history, we're going to be strong enough. When they come for our undocumented folk, for our trans folk, for Muslims, we're going to fight back. When they try and take away funding for our education, for our healthcare, to feed the hungry, we're going to fight back. And if they think they can come into this city with that stuff, we're not going to let it happen, okay? We're not going to let it happen. And we won't allow the politicians in this city to be complicit with the Zionists and the racists and the fascists in the White House. Okay, so let me introduce to you our three speakers for this evening in the order that they're going to be speaking. Okay, so first up, we're going to have Noura Erakat, who is, who is a human rights attorney, an associate professor at Rutgers University in the Department of Africana Studies and the program in criminal justice. She's the author of the amazing book, Justice for Some, Law on the Question of Palestine, which won the 2019 Palestine Book Award. And she's a co-founding editor of the amazing Jadaliyya magazine. Noura, do you want to come up and join us, please? Thank you. Okay, second up, we're going to have Emmaia Gelman, who is the director of the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism, which is an organization that you all should be checking out, does amazing work. She is a scholar of political history, a queer anti-racist activist. Her book, The Anti-Defamation League and the Racial State, which I've read a sort of version of, and it is amazing, is coming out next year, University of California Press. So look out for that. Emmaia, please join us. And third, we have Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, the author of, the author of Race for Profit, How Banks and the Real Estate Industry Undermined Black Home Ownership, which is, in one book, tells you so much about the racial disparities of wealth in this country. That was a semi-finalist for the National Book Award, finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in History. She's a 2021 MacArthur Foundation Fellow. She is the co-founder of Hammer and Hope magazine, which you all should be subscribing to. It's one of the best things you can read right now. She's a contributing writer at The New Yorker, and she's a professor of African American Studies at Princeton. Keeanga, please come to the stage. Okay, so we're going to have each speaker speak for around 15 or so minutes before we open up for a discussion. There'll be a little bit of time for Q&A, and then we've got some more stuff for you to think about and do after that. Noura, you're up first, please.
Assalamu alaikum. It is day 712 of the cruelest phase of the ongoing Nakba, where for 712 days, we have borne witness to unprecedented cruelty, more harrowing than the day before, intended to destroy the Palestinian people and to desensitize us who are watching bits in real time to prime us for the next phase of cruelty the economic and political elite intend for the rest of us. And every day, we seem to witness the atrocity that we are sure will finally turn the tables, be the final straw, the spraying of a 5-year-old girl with 335 bullets, murder of the World Central Kitchen staff, the massacre of 15 paramedics and burial with their ambulance in a mass grave, burning children alive in displacement camps, burning Ahmed Mansour at his desk in a press tent, burning Sha'ban al-Dalo while connected to an IV drip on a hospital bed, the declaration of level 5 famine or catastrophe, the confirmation that humanitarian distribution sites are sadistic death threat traps, that an Islamophobic biker group was sent to run security at those death traps, that 83% of the casualties are civilian, and yet the final straw moment never comes. Every day, we learn something damning about Israel, its settler society, its army, and its state. 82% of Israeli society supports the complete genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. 56% that believe that Palestinian citizens of the state should be expelled. Watching soldiers record themselves boasting that they shot 2 children playing football in the head. Listening to the Israeli Knesset debate why it's okay to rape prisoners. Watching Daniel Raab from Chicago saying nonchalantly how he sniped
an unarmed Palestinian and then sniped his brother who tried to retrieve his body for burial and then say, I don't know what's so important about that corpse. Listening to Avi Dichter explain this is Nakba 2023. Listening to Bezalel Smotrich bemoan, nobody will let us cause 2 million civilians to die of hunger, even though it might be justified and moral until our hostages are returned. And listening to Benjamin Netanyahu defend an attempt to assassinate the Palestinian negotiating team in Qatar as they read the terms of the new ceasefire proposal submitted by Donald Trump. And still, the moniker of uncivilized and barbarian is reserved for us. This is an ontological problem, one that considers Israelis innocent regardless of what they do, and Palestinians guilty regardless of how much they suffer. Even reluctant critics of Israel blame Palestinians, as Megyn Kelly of Fox News recently did when she said that Israel has made itself a villain of the world and that it's time to wrap it up, but then continues to say that it's Palestinians' fault because she's reluctant to believe images coming out of Gaza. They're, quote, manipulated, and Palestinians are fine to have their own children starved, so long as they can put them up on camera. That's Hamas. And frankly, it's a lot of Palestinians. What explains this? Ideology does, and specifically Zionist ideology, which even in its most cuddly, white bunny, white picket, Hasbara form, still predicates the realization of a Jewish majority state on the elimination of Palestinians, on their dispossession and removal to be replaced by a settler sovereign. Zionism is both a colonial project and a racist project. It is a race-making project that has constructed Palestinians as inferior, primordial, subhuman, unproductive, of dull mind, and dangerous, and Jewish nationals as superior, deserving, industrious, divinely chosen, aggrieved to justify the theft of Palestinian land. Though initially marshaled through colonial institutions in the Mandate period after Israel's establishment in 1948, Zionist ambitions are realized now through state legal regimes, namely immigration, property, and emergency law. An Israeli law, racial in its construction of a superior class with exclusive claims on the state, and colonial in its extraction of an other people's wealth and property, is precisely what characterizes Zionism as an intellectual and political bedfellow of apartheid. Both ideologies, forged in the crucible of British Empire, sought to expand European dominion among dark nations. The South African Communist Party historically referred to apartheid as a peculiar kind of colonialism, one rooted in land dispossession, ghettoization of natives, the exploitation of labor, and understood it as a global phenomenon. Today, most people understand apartheid as a peculiar kind of racism, like something like racism on steroids. What explains this analytical shift? One reason has been the domestication of racism in international law, which has obscured its relationship to globalized capital and transformed racism into a domestic problem for individual countries to resolve through juridical reform or diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. But racism is not abhorred merely because it hurts people's feelings or it makes you feel unseen, but because materially, the continuum of racist violence culminates in genocide. squarely understood as a global phenomenon. MLK Jr., who spoke here in 1960, 7 years later in 1967, addressed a Stanford University audience where he captured that continuum. And he said, in the final analysis, racism is evil because its ultimate logic is genocide. If one says that I am not good enough to eat at a lunch counter, or to have a good, decent job, or to go to school with him merely because of my race, he is saying consciously or unconsciously that I do not deserve to exist. International law also captures this continuum. 3 of the specific acts conducted to maintain apartheid are identical to 3 of the specific acts conducted to commit genocide. In the former, they are done with the intent to dominate. In the latter, with the intent to destroy. Nonetheless, when legacy international human rights organizations declared Israel to be an apartheid regime in late 2020 and early 2021, they did not discuss colonialism, or Zionism, or even racism. Instead, suggesting, in the words of my dear comrade and co-author John Reynolds, we have a book coming out about this. Plug. Okay. But in the words of my compa, John Reynolds, in Israel there exists apartheid without racism, according to these organizations. The Israeli organizations that also published apartheid reports were even more tepid, saying that Israeli apartheid has emerged over time without, quote, being founded on racist ideology. They suggest that Israel was once a noble endeavor that has only become discriminatory, a Frankenstein of sorts. But Israel did not become discriminatory. It is defined by racial discrimination. And the failure to contend with its racist character is a betrayal of the Palestinian intellectual and political tradition that includes, most notably, UN General Assembly Resolution 3379. The resolution was a bit of a consolation prize to Palestinian revolutionaries at the United Nations. They preferred to unseat Israel just as the Organization of African Union had done in 1974 when the GA stripped the apartheid regime of its credentials, prohibiting it from participating in international proceedings. And so here, just note, there's a distinction between participation and membership. But ask me later. To curry support to unseat Israel, the PLO spent the summer of '75 at global and regional summits. First in Mexico City at the World Conference of the International Women's Year, then in Jeddah at the Islamic Conference of Foreign Ministers, followed by the OAU in Kampala, Uganda, and finally in Lima, Peru for the non-aligned movement. Only the Islamic Conference in Jeddah endorsed the move to unseat Israel. Egypt blocked the efforts at the NAM and the OAU because they were in direct negotiations to recoup the Sinai Peninsula through bilateral negotiations with Israel, which had been occupied in 1967, and feared that the move would anger the United States and undermine their efforts. Instead of endorsing the move to unseat Israel in '75 and retract its credentials, they all condemned Zionism as a form of racism while leaving the door a little bit open. For example, the OAU decried Zionism as a racist regime and, quote, a danger to peace, to world peace, obviously. Akin to the racist regimes in Zimbabwe and South Africa, it called upon states to intensify pressure on Israel, including the possibility of, quote, eventually depriving it of its status as a member of those agencies. By the start of the 30th session of the General Assembly in the fall of '75, Egyptian-Israeli negotiations pressed ahead at the expense of Palestinian self-determination. And to enhance their leverage to be a part of the political settlement, the Palestinian Liberation Organization and its non-aligned allies initiated several efforts at the UN, including taking advantage of ongoing proceedings within the UN's Third Committee to introduce a resolution declaring Zionism as a form of racism and racial discrimination. The Third Committee, responsible for social, humanitarian, and cultural issues, was continuing its work on something called the Decade Against Racism, aimed at dismantling apartheid in South Africa. More broadly, The decade sought to eliminate, quote, racism, apartheid, racial discrimination, and the liberation of peoples under colonial domination and alien subjugation. In this context, Somalia, on behalf of a coalition of states, introduced an amendment to the Decade Resolution that proposed that the word Zionism be inserted everywhere that apartheid, colonialism, and racial discrimination appeared. The effort was almost entirely based on the work and labor of one of our greatest ancestors, Palestinian jurist Fayez Sayegh, who was born in Tabariya and became exiled from Palestine in 1948, and later went on to study and work in the United States during the height of Black liberation struggles against US apartheid, also known to us now as the Civil Rights Movement. In 1965, Sayegh published his seminal work, Zionist Colonialism in Palestine, and offered us one of the first racial and colonial theories of the ideology. He's careful to show that it is, by definition, racist. The Zionist belief that Jews constitute a race and a singular people, irrespective of religious piety or ethnic heterogeneity, he says, produces three corollaries. 1, racial self-segregation. 2, racial exclusiveness. And 3, racial supremacy. Sayegh points to the writings of leading Zionists to illuminate how self-segregation within an exclusive Jewish state is an aversion to assimilation within non-Jewish societies. He then demonstrates how racial exclusivity is the force that propels Palestinian removal and precludes cohabitation with them. Finally, Sayegh concludes segregation and exclusivity make possible the manifestation of Jewish superiority, fundamentally rooted in the belief that, quote, Jews are God's chosen people. Sayegh and his peers understood how controversial this was. They understood that the concept of a Jewish race at all is the cornerstone of European secular anti-Semitism. Europe's racialized exclusion of Jews was predicated on Orientalist conceptions of Jews as backward, dirty, religious, unfit for modernity. It is precisely what led to Nazi insistence, amongst others, that Jews cannot be integrated into national society, thus rendering them ineligible for citizenship and exogenous to European society. Palestinian scholar Hassan Saab notes that although the deadly struggle between Nazism and Zionism should have made such similarities unthinkable, anti-Semitism, Zionism, and Nazism were varying forms of nationalism and racism, nurtured in a similar geography and, quote, in the same intellectual climate. Hence, and ironically, Saab highlights, both anti-Semites and Zionists believe that Jewish integration is an impossibility and Jews must have a state of their own. The effort to condemn Zionism at the UN was incendiary. Even though other racial theories of Zionism appeared in the proceedings, namely that Zionism is a vehicle of imperialism used to, in the words of Malcolm X, create an imperial wedge to divide the Asian and African continents, and or that Zionism actually produces actual discrimination of Palestinians on the ground in practice, the flashpoint of the conversation was whether Zionism on its own was indeed a form of racism. When it finally reached the General Assembly, the fault lines were drawn. The Third World generally supported it, while Western states insisted that the question of Palestine had nothing to do with international law and should be resolved as through political negotiations. Several Western states threatened to undermine the entire decade against racism unless the amendment was dropped. And I should note that in the transcript, in the drafting history, I think it was Belgium that made this. I like Belgium today, but when Belgium made this threat and said, we'll withdraw from the entire effort if you don't drop Zionism, Fayez Sayegh stood up and said, what are you doing now to stop apartheid? All you're giving us is talk. So pull out of the decade against racism. It was effective. And despite all the political and procedural maneuvers, the resolution passed on November 10th, 1975, by a vote of 72 to 35 and 32 abstentions. The United States was furious. And within a day, on November 11th, 1975, both the House and the Senate condemned the vote as, quote, contributing to anti-Semitism, and called for a reassessment not only of the US's financial contribution to the UN, it's still the most significant financial contributor, which is why they can barely do anything. It also threatened to withdraw completely as a member from the United Nations. At the time, Henry Kissinger said that the best route was to just ignore it, and then worked on equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. For the third world, the Global South used the resolution to withhold funding from Israel and limits its participation in UN agencies. Perhaps, had the resolution still existed today, we would not be describing conditions in Palestine by analogy as apartheid or genocide, but describing it by its name as Zionism and Nakba. But it was the PLO itself that rescinded the resolution as a precondition for entering the Oslo Accords in 1991. Oslo, the autonomy framework, what I refer to as a sovereignty trap, where native obedience is incrementally awarded with no promise of liberation, is a sovereignty trap. But since the Oslo Accords fell apart in 2000, and with it the farce of a peace process, Palestinians since the early 2000s have been resuscitating an anti-Zionist analysis. First, at the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa in 2001, that culminated after 20 years of struggle during the Unity Intifada in May 2021. When Palestinians declared in the Manifesto of Dignity and Hope, "In these days, we write a new chapter, a chapter of a united Intifada that seeks our one and only goal, reuniting Palestinian society in all its different parts, reuniting our political will and our means of struggle to confront Zionism throughout Palestine." Now remember, this manifesto that comes out in May 2021 is revealed only months after what was referred to as the year of apartheid and the cascade of apartheid reports. And that confluence created a crossroads for the global community, for us, in 2021, to confront Zionism or to normalize apartheid. And as you may recall, the United States aggressively tried to normalize apartheid by facilitating permanent peace agreements between Arab regimes and Israel, also known as the Abraham Accords. Historically, normalization or the establishment of permanent peace treaties with Israel has been conditioned on achieving Palestinian self-determination. But Egypt, which was the first to establish a permanent peace with Israel in 1979, and Jordan, which was the second to establish it in 1994, achieved zero meaningful concessions for Palestinians. This last wave of agreements with Bahrain, the Arab Emirates, the Sudan, and Morocco similarly did nothing to advance Palestinian interests. They were essentially security pacts. The Abraham Accords have sought to reconfigure a new Middle East in ways that would normalize Israel's apartheid by bypassing Palestinian self-determination altogether. The same way that Henry Kissinger, as US Secretary of State, did in 1973 when he initiated the Middle East peace process and disaggregated the Arab-Israeli conflict into the Egyptian-Israeli, the Lebanese-Israeli, the Syrian-Israeli, the Jordanian-Israeli agreements to weaken their negotiating position and excluded Palestinians altogether because, according to the US government, there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. The US is, despite touting itself as the honest peace broker, is supportive of Israel for ideological, political, and imperial reasons. It wants to resolve the Palestinian question by disappearing Palestinians through co-optation, containment, or, as we are witnessing right now, outright genocide. This ongoing genocide is the direct outcome of a refusal to dismantle apartheid when confronted with its reality. And today we stand before a new crossroads. We can either confront Zionism or normalize genocide. Sadly, on the diplomatic level, even the most sympathetic states are advertently or inadvertently normalizing genocide in their effort to recognize a Palestinian state. Not because of the structural reasons, but literally. If you read the New York Declaration, negotiated or overseen by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it doesn't mention genocide. It says literally, and it puts more conditions on the Palestinians of how they can prove that they're eligible for governing themselves, including by revising their textbooks, and makes no conditions on Israel. The effort is an Oslo 2.0. These states are absolving themselves for their role in genocide and giving Zionism yet another lifeline. As a side note, whatever happens next on the diplomatic plane, whatever possibilities may or may not exist for the future, nothing is possible or ethical without accountability for the perpetrators of genocide. Nothing. Now, we are standing at this crossroads, and the choice is clear. We must confront Zionism, and that means muscling up. That means homework for you all. Study it. Grapple with the talking points. Step into the ring when it's raised as a mechanism to silence us. Develop a grammar and stand firm in your values. There is no justification for any supremacist ideology that insists that some deserve to flourish while the rest of us perish, be it apartheid, be it white supremacy, or be it Zionism. My esteemed co-panelists will be telling us a lot more about those entwinements. For now, Zionism is still racism, more obvious than ever. And we've been at these crossroads before, in 2021, in 2001, in 1975, in 1948, and in 1922, and then as now, it is still our duty to win. For the sake of our ancestors who have sacrificed so much, and for the sake of our future generation whose existence is now in question, it is our duty to win. May you be protected, may we be victorious. Thank you.
Thank you to Noura for showing us how orating works. And thanks to all of you for gathering here today. My job is to talk about the Zionist manipulations of ideas of racism, Zionist interventions in movements against racism. And when Noura was speaking about the claim, this sort of disingenuous claim that Zionism began as one thing and became something else, and specifically Noura was speaking about Palestine, it made me realize how important it is to talk about how US Zionism and Zionism as a movement that developed inside the United States also didn't start as one thing and become something else. In fact, it started much earlier even than Zionism itself. It began as white supremacy in the United States. It begins with settler colonialism in the United States. I'm going to try and follow my notes, but this is a story, actually. It's a story that I hope that we can all absorb, because the way that Zionism has so much power in US politics is because it tells a story about itself. It tells a story that's narrated very specifically by a set of organizations that are white organizations, that are wealthy and elite organizations, and that are settler organizations, that uses the language of morality and rights, and particularly civil rights, to narrate itself. And it does that not because it's the only speaker, but because it speaks over Palestinian voices, and it speaks over anti-racist voices. And it does that in part by manipulating the idea that those anti-racist voices are in fact intolerant and racist and irrational. That is something we're all familiar with in this present moment. I want to give you a little bit of history about it. The organizations that we now think of as sort of leadership in the Zionist movement, the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, and a whole host of other organizations, that some of which are fairly old, like the World Zionist Organization is pretty old and it operates in the United States in this context, and some of which are quite new. There's been a proliferation of smaller, localer, some online Zionist organizations, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years, that sort of take that model that says that they're working on anti-Semitism, they're working on rights, and turn it to the purpose of Zionism. But when we talk about where Zionism in the United States comes from as a movement, really we're talking about a few core organizations that modeled it. That's the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Committee, and on the funding side, the Jewish Federations, which were the fundraising arm of the same community. They weren't part of the same organizations, but if you could imagine the set of people who sort of populate the upper class milieu, right? They're all part of the same social fabric. They're all sharing in business. They're all moving into politics because they share in business. There's a class. You could call it the state capital class. I call it the state capital class, that developed, what was a wave of migration of Jews from Germany and the areas that became Germany between around 1820, 1840, 1860. They arrived in the United States at the moment of settlement, really. If you think about it, the railroad didn't even reach all the way across the West until the late 1880s. I think the date of the closing of the frontier, when enough land was settled, that the United States felt that it had conquered indigenous land, was, I think, 1897, right? So they arrived in the moment of settlement, and they arrived as Europeans. They were Jews, but they didn't understand their Jewishness to make them different necessarily. They thought of themselves simply as co-religionists with a shared heritage, but fundamentally as Europeans. And those were the organizations that were here that formed the sort of social fabric of Jewish life through their lodges, through their business organizations. At the moment when the next wave of immigrants came, whom we think of as the American Jewish story often, like the Russian Jewish immigrants fleeing pogroms, arriving in the shtetl, forming labor movement organizations, marching in the streets. The earlier generation of Jewish immigrants that was already in the United States and attached to wealth and attached to the state was horrified by this set of immigrants, this unruly and leftist and racialized and othered set of immigrants. And they created organizations to discipline them, to bring them into line, to teach them how not to be so obnoxious. Those are terms this is settled Jewish history. I'm not saying anything that's controversial. It's just not known that there's a difference. They created organizations to discipline the politics and the racial identity and the otherness of the immigrants who had arrived from the Russian Jewish immigration. And the organizations that they created, they were Jewish organizations in the sense that they were organized by Jews, but they were not organizations of all the people. They were organizations of the state and the state capital class. And as time went on and they developed a more robust sort of representation of Jewish community, they entered into ethnic politics and they became the representatives of Jews. They weren't Zionist because Zionism was not a popular movement until after World War II, until the 50s actually, when they started to realize that the state of Israel was a strategic asset that could help expand the colonial project of the United States. What had once been a settler project that looked only internally to the United States after World War II started to look globally, started to be concerned about extending Western influence across the globe. And it was for that purpose that Zionism became a sort of adopted politic of the upper class state capital Jewish organizations. So I want to point to Zionism as always grounded in the United States in the project of domination, in the project of settler colonialism, constructing whiteness, of dominating the left, of anti-communism, and of producing the whiteness that is endemic to the US state identity as it moves out into the world and begins its colonial endeavors, its imperial endeavors. Skipping a lot of time, there were three things that happened at once in the period between the 40s and the 60s, let's call it, that really I want us to hold as the origin point of Zionism's interventions in anti-racist movements. One is that even the immigrants who had arrived from the Russian Jewish immigration by around 1940, 1950, were acknowledged to themselves and even to the elite organizations as having become white. They weren't talking about Jews of color. That was not on their minds. But they, to the extent that people were included, had become suburbanized, had accessed wealth, were involved in government, were moving up the corporate ladder. US Jewry as a polity had become white. But at the same time, Zionism had become an interest. The idea of settling and the rationale that permitted colonialism to continue, which was that Zionism was a Jewish liberation movement and a movement of rescue. So on the one hand, you have US Jewry whitening, and on the other hand, you have this need to have a racial liberation narrative in order to advance the colonial project that's been underway. Another thing happened. The civil rights movement became the defining struggle of the United States. The advent of a new civil religion, Martin Luther King as a new founding father, these are the words of Taylor Branch, the historian. And so for the Jews of the elite organizations who were trying to advance Zionism, Jewish whiteness, which is what they had been working toward all along, actually constituted a crisis, became a problem. And it was recognized, Black organizers recognized also that even though there had been what is often called the Black Jewish Alliance, probably overstated, that in fact being part of that Black Jewish Alliance meant that Black organizing was always being subordinated to white interests. And so they pulled away. So we often hear about the moment in 1967 when SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, in a rogue edition of its newsletter that was not managed by the top manager, right, published a denunciation of Zionism as colonialism. Yes, we may. We often hear about that moment as the break, right? But actually the break was happening before, because there was a recognition that the Jewish organizations that were claiming to represent the Jewish community were in fact white organizations and were derailing, to a certain extent, the anti-racist demands of Black organizers. There were lots and lots of Jews who were organizing in civil rights outside of those organizations. It wasn't an anti-Jewish move. It was a move away from that structural whiteness. But another thing happened. I'm going to probably run short on time. I just want to put it in our minds. In 1967 also, in New York City, the Black Power movement, and in fact Black communities linked and not linked to Black Power, gained control over a small set of schools in Brooklyn, in the Ocean Hill-Brownsville School District. It was an experimental school district actually created by the Ford Foundation. It wasn't intended to really be liberatory. But community organizers seized it. And in those schools, which had been incredibly segregated, under-resourced, kids were going to school in shifts. The teachers had essentially abandoned the students. The racism was so intense that teachers were talking about students as unable to learn, right? The worst of the picture. The community took control of those schools and began to implement curriculum that taught Afrocentric culture, that taught philosophy, anti-colonial philosophy. And one of the things that they did was they sought to transfer out teachers who they believed did not invest in the project, teachers who were racist, right? Teachers who were not invested in the idea that the students in those schools could learn. That was right at the moment when the contention between the Black, transnational, anti-colonial left and Zionism was gathering its force. And the teachers' union, which was run by a white, Jewish, and also right-wing leader, Albert Shanker, although he's often identified as not right-wing, but that's part of our problem in the United States, that we don't have good language for identifying who's right-wing and who isn't, took the opportunity of that effort to transfer out those white teachers and made it about anti-Semitism. The teachers were many of the teachers were Jewish. Many white teachers were Jewish. But of course, it wasn't about the fact that they were Jewish. It was about the fact that they were racist. And he took the idea that the black communities that were taking over the schools were anti-Semitic and used it to build white opposition, broad-based white opposition, Italian, Jewish, and other sort of white ethnic pride groups against the idea of black liberation, and denounced black liberation and the school project as anti-Semitic in connecting it to its transnational and anti-Zionist roots. The reason I say this, there's so much to it, right? The Ocean Hill-Brownsville story is absolutely worth understanding better and gaining more attention. But the point of it, the point of raising it, is that this was a sort of moment which just precedes Resolution 3379, where the idea of white grievance and the idea that white people who are in positions of power and authority can't be challenged if the challenge names their identity, right? This becomes a huge lever in the push to recalibrate the idea of Jewishness again as marginal, so that Zionism can again be understood as a movement for racial liberation, and that the transnational, anti-racist, anti-colonial movement that's growing up can be denounced as intolerant and backward. So these things happening together matter a lot. Within a few years, the next installment happened. In 1974, the Anti-Defamation League published a book called The New Anti-Semitism, which articulated ideas that it had been brewing for a couple of years, that even though, as they put it, US Jewry had entered the establishment, those were the words that were written in the book, and even though the state was with Jewish interests, as they described them, that for the left to oppose the establishment meant that the left was opposing Jewish interests, and therefore the left was anti-Semitic. It was an amazing twist, an amazing turn, to take the idea of marginalization, which had been raised up through the civil rights movement, through civil rights movement discourse, and say, well, we can be marginalized even when we have power, right? An incredible inversion of meaning. That idea of the new anti-Semitism actually echoed an idea that had been devised during the Ocean Hill-Brownsville teacher strike and resistance, which was that those who were in opposition were black anti-Semites. So it took this idea of black anti-Semitism that had been sort of cooked up in that local conflict, and it expanded it now to the entire left. It was a way of attacking the Jewish left, much of which was in opposition to the interests of the elite Jewish organizations, and saying these people are not actually Jews or not actually representative, and applying this sort of marginalization narrative as a way to tank the entire left. Interestingly, the heroes and the villains of Resolution 3379 were also very much part of this. So the United Nations representative, the US representative to the UN at the time, was Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who gave a fiery speech denouncing the resolution as itself racist and intolerant. Just in case anybody needs a reminder, Moynihan was the architect of the 1965 report that established cultural racism as the sort of alternative to biological racism, and went on to be an ardent anti-communist and a neocon. Fayez Sayegh, on the other hand, was always an anti-racist and a broad-based anti-racist, was often accused by the Anti-Defamation League of trying to trick people by saying that he wasn't, in fact, against Jews, but only against Zionism. These arguments should sound familiar. In short, I think I'm done. My time is up, but I want to invite us all to think about the many other inversions that have been worked by Zionist movement. For example, the hate crimes framework for changing our discussion of how racism works from a discussion of structural racism and economic structures and white supremacist structures of government to look at conflicts between individual people on the basis of simple, prejudice or like simple hostility. I want to invite us to look at the way that anti-bias education in schools replicates this and sets aside the idea of racism in favor of a sort of idea of marginalization that has nothing to do with power. And I want us to look at how Zionist organizations use these ideas now. Martin Luther King appears on the Twitter stream or X stream of every Zionist organization alongside its denunciations of those who fight for Palestine and those who oppose racism. And even the Lawfare Project, which is the furthest right, the most avowedly right Zionist organization, uses the language, we're going to reclaim civil rights for Jews, and initiated its project with the effort to try and figure out how what Black Lives Matter did could be applied to Zionism. These inversions and these co-optations are with us everywhere. It's because the idea of anti-racism is powerful that it's co-opted. And we have to understand it as a project that begins with settler colonialism in the United States and colonization in Palestine.
Hey there. I'm a historian, and I'm going to talk about the history of Black solidarity, anti-colonial solidarity, Palestinian solidarity. I'm going to work my way there. By the halfway point of the 20th century, the Zionist ambition for the creation of a Jewish state had been an inspiration for many Black intellectuals and elites for years. If the creation of Israel was imagined as the realization of a Jewish aspiration for self-determination and independence, then it served as a beacon for many Black Americans who saw in Jews a history that resembled their own, one of bigotry, exclusion, and dispossession. The answer for some in the long Black movement for freedom was the pursuit of their own state as an enduring balm against the entrenched racism found in this country. Though not a Black nationalist, the sociologist and Black intellectual W.E.B. Du Bois championed Zionism and its pursuit of a state as a kind of reparation for the long history of anti-Semitism. For Du Bois, this was not conjecture. In 1893, for example, he had traveled to Eastern Europe to observe social conditions there when he experienced this anti-Semitism firsthand. When out with a Jewish friend in Germany, he noticed that people were acting strangely towards them. He assumed that it was because he was Black, but his friend clarified, quote, "They think I may be a Jew. It's not you they object to, it's me." Du Bois, very early in the 20th century, had become known for his meticulous accounting of the impacts of discrimination in the development of Black communities, as he did in the 1903 book, The Philadelphia Negro. To thwart the charges of white supremacy, which described the disproportionate rates of Black poverty as natural and inherent. Indeed, it was Du Bois's travels through Europe, his engagement with the Jewish diaspora, and his understanding of Jewish history that had inspired his use of the word and concept of ghetto, originated as a place where Jews were forcibly confined to, as a potential threat to Black people migrating out of the South who were enduring the violence and exclusion created by racial pogroms in cities across the country in the 19-teens. Du Bois, considered a godfather of sociology in the United States, was deeply analytical, curious, and questioning as he fought the framing of white supremacists when it came to understanding the conditions of Black life in the United States. But when it came to the question of Palestine, Du Bois was anecdotal and presumptuous, relying upon the tropes of the Zionist arguments to advocate for a Jewish state. In an article written just days before the United States would partition Palestine for the sake of creating the state of Israel, He described Palestine as desolate and empty, writing, quote, "Palestine is a land largely of plateaus, mountains, and deserts, sparsely inhabited." He cast the indigenous Palestinian Arab population as incapable of self-rule, writing, quote, "Among the Arabs, there is widespread ignorance, poverty, and disease, and a fanatic belief in the Mohammedan religion, which makes these people suspicious of other peoples and other religions. Their rulership is a family and clan despotism, which makes effective use of democratic methods difficult." As a result of these factors and the history of hardship endured by Jews, Du Bois vociferously advocated for the creation of the State of Israel. By the early 1950s, Du Bois's affection for the Jewish state and what he saw as the overlap in experience of Black Americans was unquestioned. In a 1952 article about the Warsaw Ghetto, a site of a historic struggle of Jewish resistance against the Nazis, he wrote, quote, "I have seen something of a human upheaval in this world. The scream and shots of a race riot in Atlanta, the marching of the Ku Klux Klan, the threat of courts and police, the neglect and destruction of human habitation. But nothing in my wildest imagination was equal to what I saw in Warsaw in 1949. Du Bois was not only speaking for himself, but giving voice to a class of Black elites and intellectuals who saw a shared horizon with Israel. But Du Bois's Zionist myopia would soon come into conflict with another developing reality that would give rise to new Black voices that saw their histories and their futures enmeshed with the forgotten and marginalized indigenous Arab population. In 1955, 29 newly independent Asian, Arab, and African countries gathered in Bandung, Indonesia, to mark the emergence of the Third World, or now known as the Global South, as a new epicenter of post-colonial thought and politics. In doing so, it created a new basis for international solidarity among the world's colored population, rooted in solidarity, a commitment to racial equality, mutually beneficial economic development, and political neutrality, by which it pledged to rebuke the influence, the new bipolar world organized around the superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union. Israel was not invited to Bandung, a reflection of its peculiar history. While political Zionism defined itself as a national liberation movement, it was unlike any other that gathered in Bandung. The dominant feature of national liberation movements of the countries gathered had been a rejection of Western imperialism, including capitalist development, which had resulted in the underdevelopment of all their countries. These ideas were articulated through a developing politics of anti-colonialism. But Zionism was different in that it did not seek to make common cause with other oppressed, newly forming nations. Instead, Israel courted the patronage and influence of imperialist powers as opposed to rejecting them. Zionists were not interested in the self-determination or liberation for the overwhelming Palestinian majority within its newly formed borders. Instead, the Zionists looked to expel the Palestinians. The demands of a Jewish state in a land that was overwhelmingly Arab required a transformation of the local demography. It required ethnic cleansing. Israel also distinguished itself among the newly emergent nations of color by aligning itself with the pariah state of South Africa. Ironically, the white supremacist National Party of South Africa also took power in 1948, immediately codifying the previous informal regime of apartheid or racial separation. The white supremacist politics of South Africa did not prevent the state of Israel from entering into clandestine military and armament agreements with it. Israel provided weapons that helped to police and repress the Black anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. Armored tanks, tear gas, riot gear, Uzi machine guns, helicopters, and military radar were all instrumental to suppressing activism, but also managing apartheid in daily life, including the pass system, which dictated where Black people could live and what types of jobs were available to Black South Africans. Finally, Israel helped to train South African special forces, which played important roles in surveilling and repressing Black activists. Israeli complicity with South African apartheid would also play a role in the development of new solidarities emerging out of the post-World War II, post-colonial world. One of the first Black Americans to publicly and forthrightly assert a politics of internationalism in this new context that viewed Black American solidarities more expansively in the context of a rising anti-colonial movement was Malcolm X. Malcolm X had come of age politically in the insular world of the Nation of Islam, but the development of his consciousness was propelled by his growing politics of internationalism. Anti-colonial politics helped to shape his own understanding of Black oppression and exploitation at home. In fact, these ideas were not particular to Malcolm X, but widely shared. In 1966, during a year-long campaign in Chicago, Martin Luther King Jr. decried what he called, quote, slum colonialism in that city's Black neighborhoods, by which he was identifying the monies extracted from ghettos through the deliberate failures of maintenance and care taken by local landlords. 1 year earlier, in 1965, weeks before he was murdered, Malcolm X would also describe a suffocating system of what Black activists came to describe as internal colonialism that cut Black people off from good jobs, social stability, and upward mobility that was supposed to be the defining characteristics of American society. Malcolm X said of Black life in the United States, quote, "The whole world thinks that America's race problem is being solved, when actually the masses of Black people in America are still living in the ghettos and slums. They are still the victims of inferior housing. They are still the victims of a segregated school system, which gives them an inferior education. They are still victims after they get that inferior education where they can only get the worst form of jobs. And they do this very skillfully to keep us trapped." What was the answer to this vexing dynamic? Malcolm X said, quote, "Africa is emerging. It is making the Black man in the Western Hemisphere militant. Above all else, he sees now that he has allies. He sees that the brothers on the African continent who have emerged and gotten independent states can see that they have an obligation to the lost brothers who went astray and then found themselves today in a foreign land. And just as you see the oppressed people all over the world getting together, the Black people in the West are also seeing that they are oppressed. Instead of just calling themselves an oppressed minority in the States, they are part of the oppressed masses of people all over the world today who are crying out for action against the common oppressor. In this way, Malcolm X and a growing number of Black radicals overcame the dilemma of being a racial minority within the United States by seeing the domestic struggle for freedom as part of a wider global liberation movement, pitting the oppressed against their oppressor. This was the broader context to the public embrace of the Palestinian cause by Black activists by the late 1960s. And when Israel launched military strikes against its Arab neighbors in what has been called the Arab-Israeli War of 1967, for Black militants, it demonstrated the true character of the Israeli state while also highlighting the particular vulnerabilities of Palestinians. Israel engaged in a war of territorial conquest, annexing East Jerusalem and seizing the West Bank from Jordan, Gaza from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. Under international law, acquiring territory by force is prohibited. The UN Security Council adopted Resolution 242, calling for Israel to withdraw from territories occupied in the conflict in exchange for peace. Israel has refused to do so. 1967 was also a high water mark in the Black liberation struggle that had overtaken the civil rights movement. Weeks after the Israeli seizures, Detroit and Newark exploded in the largest and most consequential Black rebellions of the 1960s. At the core of the Black insurgency were inchoate ideas about self-determination, freedom, and community control. But these very local struggles were viewed as part of a global uprising against oppression and exploitation and, yes, colonialism. Even more consequently, this was unfolding against the radicalization of American youth in response to the nation's illegal and immoral war in Vietnam. The Vietnam War was not the typical war of colonial conquest, but one of colonial pacification, as the United States sought to destroy the North Vietnamese National Liberation Movement, seeking to drive Western imperialism out of their country to take control of their own destiny. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, a pivotal organization of young people that had helped to build and organize the civil rights movement, would go on to become one of the first organizations to speak out in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. But before they turned to Palestine, they became fierce opponents of the Vietnam War. In 1966, they wrote, quote, "We, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, have been involved in the Black people's struggle for liberation and self-determination in this country for the past 5 years. Our work, particularly in the South, has taught us that the United States government has never guaranteed the freedom of oppressed citizens and is not yet truly determined to end the rule of terror and oppression within its own borders. We maintain that our country's cry of preserve freedom in the world is a hypocritical mask behind which it squashes liberation movements which are not bound and refuse to be bound by the expediencies of the United States Cold War policies." This was before Martin Luther King spoke out against the Vietnam War in 1967. The following year, SNCC began having internal debates about Israel and Palestine in the aftermath of the 1967 war. In the pages of their newsletter, they published a fact sheet about the history of Israel and Palestine titled Third World, the Palestine Problem. In explaining its purpose, the newsletter said, "Since we Afro-Americans are an integral part of the Third World, then it is indeed necessary for us to know and understand what our brothers are doing in their homelands." SNCC had expelled all of its white members by then and was fully entrenched in its Black nationalist politics phase. So these debates took on particular significance. In August of 1967, SNCC released a discussion document that it circulated within the organization trying to clarify its position on Israel. Beginning with the recognition of the historic horrors of the Holocaust, the document read, "We recognize Hitler's massacre of Jews as one of the worst crimes against humanity." But ultimately they concluded, quote, "In the Middle East, America has worked with and used the powerful organized Zionist movement to take over another people's home and to replace these people with a partner who has well served America's purpose, a partner that can help the United States and other white Western countries to exploit and control the nations of Africa and the Middle East." SNCC's position was organizationally consequential. They lost funding and influence in response to their public statements. It created tension within the organization as well. Some wanted to shoehorn the Israeli-Palestinian conflict into an American paradigm of Black and white hostilities, while others remained focused on Israel's role as an American client state, acting as an outpost of American and Western imperialism writ large, even as the US was trying to lay waste to Vietnam. It should be understood that these were minority positions of SNCC and not particularly representative of what most of Black America thought. Indeed, while SNCC was engaged in these discussions, it was well beyond the twilight of its influence in organizing capacities. Israel remained popular among Black Americans. Black liberals continued to cling to Zionism and the Israeli state for a variety of reasons. One, with the passage of civil rights legislation, including the Voting Rights Act, there was the emergence of Black elected officials and a changed relationship between Black Americans and the Democratic Party. The unquestioned allegiance to Israel as a feature of Democratic Party politics meant that as more Black elected officials became involved with the party, their politics would need to reflect this reality. And two, there had been a long history of collaboration between Black and Jewish organizers, both liberal and radical, ties that could not be easily undone, relationships and history that was difficult to sunder, even in the wider political context of Israel as a rising regional power in the Middle East, complicated Jewish and Black political relations locally. This generation of Black liberals had direct and clear relationship with liberal and radical Jews that complicated their understanding of Israel, all unfolding within decades of the atrocities of the Holocaust. I'm wrapping up. What should also be said is that there was not and is not an automatic unity among the oppressed. The notion that because we may all share some form of oppression does not mean that we share an understanding of why it arises or what we should do about it. These politics became even more complicated as national liberation movements across the world morphed into the development and ascendance of a post-colonial political ruling class. The ties of solidarity that had developed in the cauldron of anti-colonial struggle became vexed and complicated. In the same way that the ascendance of Black people into the political class after the civil rights and Black liberation struggles has complicated notions of Black politics and Black solidarity here within the United States. None of us will soon forget that it was an African-American woman, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who consistently, disgustingly, voted alone in the United States, blocking ceasefire resolutions and other efforts to end Israel's war on Gaza. Moreover, maintaining ties of international solidarity were further complicated as relatively new independent nation states took on coercive and debilitating debt from the IMF and World Bank, which made political deference to the Washington Consensus a contingency for survival and political longevity. In closing, despite the collapse of internationalism among the American left and as a powerful strain in Black politics, parts of it were revived when in 2014, the emergence of Black Lives Matter overlapped with the then latest Israeli war on Gaza that killed more than 2,000 Palestinians. There were conscious efforts both here and there among young grassroots activists to find common bonds in oppression and repression, and out of that, commitments to fight for each other's well-being. The genocide of Palestinians by Israel has revived a deeper sense of solidarity. A large portion of Black Americans have consistently expressed significant opposition to the war in Gaza. In February 2024, the Council of Bishops of the African Methodist Episcopal Church called for the United States to halt all financial aid to Israel, citing the military campaign and arguing, quote, "The United States is supporting this mass genocide. This must not be allowed to continue." A March 2024 poll found that 68% of Black people wanted the US to call for an immediate ceasefire. There are two reasons to understand Black solidarity with Palestine in this context. One is that a genocide can only be understood in the context of racism. It is the necessary ingredient to habituate the public to the daily mass murder of Palestinian children, their mothers, fathers, uncles, aunties, grandparents, cousins, and their friends. Not precluding other geopolitical considerations of why the US allows this to happen. But racism is never for its own sake. As Toni Morrison once said in a dialogue with Angela Davis, racism is a means to an end. But nevertheless, it is a powerful and destructive means. Just as Jim Crow was not just about the physical separation of black from white, Israeli apartheid is not only about being separate from Palestinians. It is about the extraordinary power that allows a people to be freed from the presence of whom they believe to be the malignant other. It is the extraordinary power of wielding the legal imprimatur to mark and define that inferiority. It is the extraordinary power to cast out of its sight what those who wield it describe as the filthy Arab, the human animal, the disgust they wish not to see. Even the critique of the chant "From the River to the Sea" hinges on the assumption that bloodthirsty Arabs mean the mass murder of Jews, not the democratic coexistence of Jews and Arabs in a single state. So black solidarity with Palestinians in this century has less to do with anti-colonial solidarity, but rather from a shared commitment to the radical politics of anti-racism. The same kind of commitment that inspired the black-led anti-apartheid movement against South Africa in the 1980s, a visceral revulsion against racism. And when the extraordinary eliminationist power of racism and ethnic cleansing is subsidized and endorsed by our government, we are duty-bound to use whatever voice and influence we have to reject and organize against it. Finally, the Palestinian struggle is so popular, not just among black people, but among the young, among the oppressed, for the same reasons that the black movement of the 1960s earned the respect of people from across the globe. Here you have an utterly oppressed and subjugated population that refuses to submit to the will of a much more powerful opponent. The Palestinian movement, like an earlier iteration of the black movement, is a beacon of hope, a testament to survival, a celebration of defiance, a celebration of a people of unimaginable courage that has inspired admiration, respect, and reverence. Thank you.
Okay, people, we've been sitting patiently, absorbing the learning, these rich histories of struggle and insurgency. Now it's time, we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. Please keep your questions brief because we haven't got that much time, but we have our three amazing scholars here ready to respond to a few questions from the audience. So yes, I have one person here first.
Can you hear me? This is a question for all of you, and it's about the discourse of human rights, which is something that I think all of you have touched on. I used to work for one of those organizations that discovered genocide, discovered apartheid, but didn't discover racism in the process. And it's kind of emblematic of these aporias and omissions that are constant in the practice of international human rights. So what I want to ask is, how useful is human rights as a discourse to liberation movements, to anti-colonial movements, to the Palestinian movements? Can these omissions be repaired, and what alternatives are there?
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question from you in the hat over there, please.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Good evening, everyone. My name is Asantwa Nkrumah Toure. My pronouns are she, her, and co-conspirator with the Palestinian people. All righty. So, also a member of Philly for Palestine Coalition. Real quickly, I think for those of us in this movement where we sometimes get badgered is that we, the anti-imperialist left, do not always define who are Semitic people, and that is used against us. So if any of you could offer us some clarity on that. Lastly, I've been looking for several years from the essay, There Can Never Be Peace with Zionism, written by Mama Shirley Graham Du Bois in 1967 when she was in Egypt at the invitation of Nasser. I'm trying to find it. Have any of you seen it, found it? Let me know where it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to give our speakers a chance to respond to those two questions in a moment, but just an announcement, because we're running a little bit late, we started about 15, 20 minutes late, the childcare provision that we have to look after our 40 or so kids in an adjacent room is going to finish at 8:15. So that's in just over 20 minutes or so. So we're going to carry on with the Q&A, but those of you who've got kids over there, just bear that in mind, please. Okay, two questions there on the usefulness of human rights discourse and Shirley Graham Du Bois and so on.
You know, I'm commonly referred to as a human rights attorney, and indeed, I did work in human rights advocacy, but if you read me, most of the time I spend my time railing against this framework of human rights, right? This is a structure. Human rights emerges at a particular time as an ideology to compete with other ideologies, to compete with communist, ideology and capitalist ideology, and it emerges in this context. But it doesn't emerge outside of a political context, and as Matao Matua would have it, there's always the survivor, the savage, the victim, and the survivor. So human rights in and of itself reproduces civilizational tropes that would have us believe that even those who we advocate on behalf of are not able to rule themselves and need to be saved by a greater civilizational other, right? So I hear you, and I do think human rights can be useful, and I haven't struck it from my title. Because in my use of the law, I use the law a bit like a gorilla would, right? I have no fidelity to the law. None of you should have fidelity to the law. The law is a structure, and especially international law, which basically begins as a way to create peace between imperial powers competing over waterways and resources and people to kidnap and enslave, right? So it is a site of domination. Now, what do guerrillas do, knowing that they have very few resources at their behest, at their feet? They turn their adversaries' strengths into weaknesses and their weaknesses into strengths. And there have been, and as the Palestinian tradition has demonstrated, the use of international law, including the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, to use it against their adversary, but only when it's used in the service of political movement. So for those of us who want to use the law, I encourage you to do so, but never on your own. The law doesn't have any normative value. Our political movements have value. They are the compass. Today, as the People's Conference in Detroit reminded us, Gaza is the compass. So to the extent that we're going to use it, we use it in the service of that politics. And just to, I don't need to go into a critique of it, but that's where I'll stop. If you're gonna use it on behalf of political movements, use it like a tool, discard it when it works against you, pick it up when it can serve you, create new law when you can.
I can take the question about Semitic, who's the value of the discussion about who's Semitic, I think. I think that this is a response that we often hear to the charge of anti-Semitism, right? That like, well, how can we be anti-Semitic when Arabs are Semitic peoples as well? And what is this, what is this distinction we're trying to make? I think the short answer is that when we engage with the question of who is Semitic and who's not, there are two things at stake. One is the question of history, like who has a right to be in a place historically, and the other is a question of race. Who is a person of color? Who is, who is indigenous, as the Zionist claim now goes. I think both of them are tricks. And I think that they're both invitations to a trick. The historical question, I don't think that we can have an honest conversation about colonialism if we're reverting to the question of who has a right to be in a space, because what we're talking about is domination and genocide, right? Nobody has a right to be in a space where they're committing genocide. Nobody has a right to be in a place where they're creating an ethno-state. So I actually don't care that my ancestors were Babylonian. I mean, I do care because it's of interest, but it has nothing to do with the state, right? So I'm not interested in the argument about who's Semitic from that perspective. And from the perspective of the question of race is a construction of capital and colonialism. Arun knows. Arun wrote the book. Right? It is a good book. Race is a construction of capitalism and colonialism, and the idea that we can have a conversation about race that's sort of biological and exists outside of that in order to decide who's really oppressed or who's really a person of color is, I think, another trick. So who people are in this moment is who they're acting as, right? So Zionists are arriving from a European colonial context. They've inducted a whole host of Arab Jews into their project, and others as well. And yet it's still a European, fundamentally a European and Western colonial project. I think we can leave it there.
Thank you. Any other questions for anyone?
What is the most realistic pathway to help families in Gaza that you would recommend?
Hi, good evening. My question is, when is this genocide going to end, especially since a week or two ago, Israel tried to assassinate the Palestinian negotiators in Doha? Okay. And where are we going to be 6 months from now, a year from now? Are we still going to be in the same spot discussing these issues and no end to the genocide?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to start by finishing this thought on human rights real quick. And I really just want to, I wanted to make this point that the reason it should be subservient to political movement, as should be revolutionary violence and everything else should be subservient to political movement, right? Is also because it could be really depoliticizing. So that human rights have been co-opted by our adversaries, for example, to insist that settlers have a right to stay in their home, and a right to their family reunification, and use this language in the reverse, and a right to self-determination on lands that they stole. And so to explain that, anyway. All right, so on to these questions. I'll work with the first question. What's the most realistic way to help families in Gaza? Palestinians in Gaza don't need our saving. Palestinians in Gaza need us to stop harming them. We in the United States are the primary source of harm to Palestinians in Gaza. So what Palestinians need everywhere, frankly, is for us to take responsibility for our government and what it does in our name. Full stop. And that means taking a tremendous amount of risk in these moments, in these very precarious moments, in order to basically, what's become so evident and has been evident, right, is that the United States is not a third party to the genocide, but this is a US-Israeli genocide. It is US corporations that are being enriched. These are US, ideas that are being expanded. The weakening of Arab regimes and Arab governments, the making democracy a dream for Arabs across the region is a US project of being able to have access to resources and domination. We are being enriched as a result of it, even though those of us who are racialized in empire are not necessarily equal. But this is done in our name. And so it's our responsibility. That's why everybody looks to us. What are we doing? Because we know that this is the lever. And in this moment, it's so important, right? When everybody wants to focus on Trump and what Trump is doing at universities and these threats that Trump has made to Harvard and Columbia and NYU and Berkeley and the rest of it, Nobody was making threats to those universities when they were arresting their students and bloodying them under the Biden administration. There were no threats. There was no compulsion. They did it on their own. Because even the trustees of these universities have interests. They are also being enriched. So if you are at a university, you have a target. It's your trustees. It's your endowments. If you live in a city, we have a target. My daughter asked me, Mommy, I saw a list of, Philadelphia. I had to pick its sister city. Why is Tel Aviv on the list? Why is Tel Aviv on this list? We have a duty here in the U.S. Palestinians are ready to save themselves. My God, they're about to save us all with their example. And so I encourage you to again, muscle up. Let's take responsibility for the harm that we're causing.
Did you two want to come in?
I don't know. I mean, that's an impossible question to answer. When will this end? Who the hell knows? The point is, what do we do in the interim? So maybe those questions are connected, and so I think that we have to. I mean, one, I have been organizing around this question of Palestine in some form or another, or been involved in solidarity movements around Palestine really since the late 1990s. And in many respects, even though the enormity of what we face is overwhelming, the enormous loss of life, just the enormity of what we are facing is overwhelming. It's also, the movement has never felt this large. The movement has never felt this impactful. And so I think that is important. And I think that we have to continue to figure out, how do we continue to expand this movement in the United States? And so, that means taking up questions of where we are on campuses, in communities, at workplaces, and really thinking about that always with other people, about what is it that we can do to continue to increase the size, influence, and power of this movement. And to me, that's part of what it means when Noura is saying that we have to know something, right? Like, we have to know something about history. We have to know something about politics in order to be effective in doing that. And this is one of the reasons why, I was really excited about this event, because it wasn't, let's have 12 people on a panel speak for 2 minutes each, cheering each other on. But it was like, let's get together and try to learn something and to deepen our knowledge, not for the sake of deepening our knowledge, but for the sake of being effective organizers, effective activists, effective advocates, that we may be able to go out and influence people for the sake of building a larger movement. And that really is the responsibility that we have in this country in particular, that is financing and endorsing and cheering on what is happening to Palestinians.
Thank you. Absolutely. Okay. I'm afraid that's it for questions. Sam Rise, can you join me on the stage, please? Sam Rise, everyone.
Yes. have a little bit of closing activity, but I'm actually like shaking. And I think that's in part because I feel like this must be like what my dog feels like when I bring her into the coffee shop. And like everybody's, being brilliant, and you're just like wagging and excited about the treat that you're getting. This was so magical. Give a round of applause to these incredible panelists, please. To Arun for facilitating. I'm going to give you a little bit of forewarning. Brevity's not my strength, but I'm really working on it right now, I promise you. But I'm going to ask you to hum, and then I'm going to ask you to sing in a second, okay? All right, okay. I like that. Thank you. Send that energy all the way up through this group of folks, okay? We're going to hum in a second. We're going to sing, give ourselves some honorable closure, and we're also going to make sure that we take care of what we are duty-bound to do, which is to continue to deepen the critical connections and relationships we have to one another, to find and culture our political homes, right? In an effort to continue to grow this movement, but also grow our relationships so that they outmode all of these things that would otherwise divide us, break us up, shut us down, right? We have a responsibility to each other to fight for each other's liberation, right? And so that's all there is to do. It's also our responsibility to practice raising our voices when it's easy, like when it's in spaces like this, so that we can go out and do it when it's hard, okay? So being able to sing together, commiserate, but also celebrate together, gossip together, gas each other up, right? And also metabolize this incredible learning that we've had that's the easy part. And we have to do it richly and deeply so that we can take it out there and do it when it's hard, okay? We've got some incredible mandates from our speakers. I heard muscle up at least 3 times, and I'm about to tattoo it to my forehead. Let's go, okay? We have to interrogate the inversions of language and of the tenets of civil rights and anti-racism, right? We've got to be constantly looking at that and practicing all of the skills that we can show up and disrupt and interrupt those things, right, on the ground. So we don't have to wait for an incredible, brilliant scholar to share with us their knowledge and hear it, but that we can actually practice that in conversation with people who would otherwise diminish our understanding. We've always known, right, that this kind of violence that we're seeing, this genocide, and all articulations of colonial violence and discrimination and racism are wrong, have always been. We need to make our visceral revulsion to racism actionable. Okay, the thing that we feel, the thing we know is true, we need to transform that into action, not just conversation with one another, not just backbiting on Instagram or Facebook, right? But to move that into the streets and to choose each other and to say, you're not disposable to me, so what table do I need to go to learn what my next right step is in bold, creative, collaborative action with one another, right? And that we have to use whatever voice we have to reject and organize around that racism and around that violence. Woo. And we have a mandate, too, that we heard earlier tonight from my beloved comrade Jethro, who brought in the voices of Palestinian people, right? They don't need us to save them, but they're telling us what to do every single day. In addition to the horrors that are being live streamed to us, the mandate is being live streamed to us, too, which is just to do the next right thing, whatever we can, even if it's just raising your voice to say it's a genocide. But I know, you and I know, we can be doing much more than that, right? You know we can be doing much more than that, right? Yeah. Right. So it's our responsibility to embolden and empower each other to be bold in this space. We can leave this space bold and be dangerous to these institutions together. That's our responsibility, right? Cool. Yeah. So I would love it. We've got, as Arun mentioned, there are some organizations here that are doing some incredible work. We're lucky within Philly Palestine Coalition that we get to amplify these specific practices and projects and campaigns that are happening all over Philly and that are connected to broader campaign work in our wider world. So if you're here tabling for an organization, can you throw a hand up? Yeah. And we need, respectfully, we need the quick and dirty. All right, but you got to tell the people what you're here for so we can come and show up to get into collaboration with you. Yeah.
All right, my name's Adam. I'm with Jewish Voice for Peace, but I'm going to talk about a campaign that we're doing in partnership with other faith-based organizations, including CARE. Philly is a really important partner in this campaign. In the vein of taking responsibility and ending that relationship of imperialism, we're trying to break the bonds, specifically Israel bonds, that Pennsylvania has $81 million invested in that. So if you want to find out how to divest, then come see our table.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chi-Ming Yang, and I'm here for the Penn faculty and staff for justice in Palestine, and a current, thanks. Right now, one of our major campaigns is to support farmers on the ground in Gaza through a really amazing organization called the Arab Group for the Protection of Nature. They are able to smuggle seedlings into Gaza to create fast-growing crops, and move with the people as they're moving. They're working with 800 farmers on the ground and able to then evade the blockade around so much of the resources and food that's stuck at the border. So if you'd like to learn more about that work, we have a table over there. Thank you.
My name is Diane, and I'm with Code Pink in Philly. And there are a few of us here tonight. Would love to talk to you a little bit if we have a chance to and share. But I brought petitions that I have available. We have been working with folks who have been meeting with their Congress people to get them to vote to end weapons. And it started with Madeline Dean, with Mary Gay Scanlon, and just recently Dwight Evans have now agreed to the Block the Bombs bill. But we need many more. So this petition would be a way that you can very quickly take 1 minute and reach out to all the Philly area delegation legislators and let them know that we want an arms embargo and the end to war and support for the the Samud Flotilla.
Hi, I'm the managing editor of Rethinking Schools. We just put out a book called Teaching Palestine. Thank you. If you are an educator or a teacher, or if you're an activist and want to bring interactive pedagogy to your organization, right? You need the book. Come get it from me. We are also the publisher of a quarterly journal where we share national stories from social justice educators involved in movements across the nation. Our next edition, which comes out next month, has an incredible story from activists in UTLA about how they got their union to divest, to vote for divestment, right? Along with a whole bunch of other really crucial stories for that we can learn from around the country. So I hope people will come, get the book, and I hope there's someone from Philly Educators for Palestine here, but if there's not, you can come talk to me. I'm a member of them as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Ahmed, I'm with CARE Philadelphia. Two quick sort of requests. One, if you are a mental health provider or know someone who can work from within our movement, we are coupling our clients, legal clients, with mental health specialists as we work on their legal cases so that they can receive the support that they need. Second, if you're a legal professional, while recognizing the limits of law, we do need a lot of legal help. So I'll be at the table, inshallah. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Neka. I am a facilitator at the W.E.B. Du Bois Movement School for Abolition Reconstruction. I'm here with my comrades DJ, Gio, and Ant. We teach revolutionary history to fledgling revolutionaries. We have four central tenets. We are abolitionists, we are internationalists, we are intersectional and participatory, but one of our main tenets is that we are internationalists, which means we understand that the fight in Philly is the same fight in Gaza, in Palestine, in Sudan, in the Congo, and that through studying history, we understand that we're not going to be lied to by Zionists, by racists, by any of those entities that try to take our history from us, but we also understand that the arc of history belongs to the global oppressed, and that we are all in this room because we know that Palestine will win, that Palestine will be free, that it is inevitable, and and that the systems that we are confronting must be fought within the imperial core as hard as it's being fought on the ground in Palestine. So we're tabling upstairs. Come out and check us out. Say hi, we don't bite. Maybe study with us in the future. Follow us on socials. Yeah. Can I take another minute, please? Because I'm also a co-conspirator in the No Sisters to Genocide project, which is a campaign trying to end the sister cities relationship between Tel Aviv and Philadelphia. Petition campaigns can kind of feel like BS, but kind of the effort of this campaign is to get enough signatures so that we can take the signatures and confront the mayor. The ending of the sister cities relationship is contingent on the mayor sending a letter to Tel Aviv saying, we don't mess with you anymore, we don't want to be sister cities, and that is about all that it takes. So we're hoping that if we get enough signatures and get enough support from the city, that we can make that confrontation and that we can end our relationship with the murder capital of the Middle East. The last thing I'll say is that there are flyers upstairs. You can scan the QR code on the flyers, take the flyers with you, give them to friends, family, sign the petition, etc. And let's free Palestine, baby.
My name is Malav Kanuga. I'm part of Making Worlds Cooperative Bookstore and Social Center in West Philly. We are convergence and coalition space for good books, for meaningful political conversations, a space to find each other, to deepen our ways of understanding each other's struggles, our histories, and our commitments to each other's freedom dreams. We made it through about 5 years in our current location with the good grace and a lot of community steam. So thank you for showing up and helping us move through the last 5 years. We are moving spaces in the new year and doubling down on our political programming and our studies. So come find us upstairs and chat with us and help us shape our future together for a city that really knows how to turn it up and organize.
Hi everyone, I'm Francesca. I am a member of the national elected leadership of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA. I also moved to Philly 2 weeks ago. So DSA is the largest socialist organization in the country. Crucially, when it was founded in the 80s, it was founded as an explicitly Zionist, anti-communist organization. And I'm very proud to say that after many, many years of really tough, principled, political struggle within the organization, at our last national convention this summer, we passed a very radical resolution that embraces the Tawabit, the principles, the red lines of the Palestinian struggle, and establishes Zionism as an expellable offense for DSA members and electeds. And so, I'm very proud to say that today we're not just the largest socialist organization in the country, we are the largest socialist anti-Zionist organization. So this is a very good time to get involved in DSA. We have tons of campaigns in Philly and nationwide. We're doing divestment, we're doing food boycotts, we're doing arms embargo work, so we have a table upstairs, come chat.
Hi everyone, my name's Laura. I'm from Writers Against the War on Gaza. Hi. I'll be really brief, but we are an organization of writers, journalists, educators, cultural workers trying to build a cultural front in support of the Palestinian struggle. And we put out a newspaper called The New York War Crimes, which we have many copies of. Hopefully you've read some of it. There's a new issue out which was produced with SJP and is kind of about student struggles. The War Crimes is kind of an avenue for critiquing mainstream coverage, particularly the New York Times coverage of Palestine, but also providing a forum for radical Palestinian, Arab, Muslim journalists to present their takes on what's going on and first-person accounts. We also do anti-repression work for cultural workers who are being harassed and fired for speaking out for Palestine. And we support a bunch of other campaigns. Please come visit our table. We're having a town hall. We do quarterly town halls. We're having one October 21st at the Calvary Center that will be focused on the theme of boycotts. And we'll be having some of the groups that are here who are doing local or national campaigns that are Palestinian boycott campaigns like Mask Off Maersk, the No Sister to Genocide. And so if you're interested in any of that, please come to our town hall next month. Thank you.
2 seconds, quick. Mike, not also from Philly DSA, but primarily here for Camp of Hope. We do direct mutual aid to Gaza via our friend Nara, who lives in Sheikh Ajlin. It's about 48 hours. That camp is no more, so we moved down south. Rent is about $318 a month, so we'd appreciate your support.
Hi, I'm Emmaia Gelman. I'm the director of the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism. We are a research and education organization, but we also are a defense and community organization because otherwise you can't do the study of Zionism. So we have a wide range of resources that we're trying to sort of push out to campuses and communities. We have a podcast that's digestible and short. It's soon to be soon to have a mini series on K through 12 and Zionist attacks on K through 12, which I hope will include an episode on Philly. And we have all kinds of written resources. We have zines, and we have work groups, including a work group on Fayyaz Sayeg's archive that you are all invited to come find out about. You can ask me about it, and our website is chock full.
Everybody, that's it on our tabling. So every one of those people and all the people that they're collaborating with are now your collaborators. I often say everybody's a future friend or a friend. So if you didn't know someone in this room, they're a future friend. And you got to make good on creating those connections so we can keep doing this work together. Please visit everybody at the tables upstairs. Hopefully everybody's wrangled or is about to wrangle their tiny children people. We got to do that. We can start moving. I'm wondering if we have 90 seconds together that we could just take 3 breaths and have an honorable closure. Can we do that? We can do it? Okay. So if everybody would just take a minute with me and put your hands on your heart or on your body somewhere that feels good. I promise I won't make this longer than, a few breaths in together. But what I'd love for you to do right now is just take all of this, all of the possibility, everything there is to potentiate with all these people at these tables. So you're going to go make good on those connections soon. I want you to take everything that these incredible, incredible scholars, fighters, caregivers, lovers, organizers have offered us tonight, right? And everyone in this room that's contributed something that's not on this stage, who made this a place where we could really live into our freedom dream, a liberated world that starts with Palestine, which is the beating heart of our movements. Right, take all of that. I want you to take a deep breath into that and just hum. Just say, hum. Yeah, it doesn't have to be in tune with the person next to you, but I just want you to do it. We're going to do this for 90 seconds. Oh, just like that. Keep that going for me. That's right. And for now, I want you to take that hum that you're creating with all the people around you. Keep it going. If you stop, someone else will pick it up. It's just going to continue. So take your breath as you need to, but don't stop. For now, I want you to hum to all of the people at your back brought you into this room. All of your ancestors, your beloveds, the people that are part of your family, your movement ancestors. I want you to take a moment to breathe into the lineages that have always known that we are here to awaken from the illusion of separateness. That our liberation has always been inextricably bound to Palestinian liberation. That's a radical solidarity. Keep humming. That's it. Yeah. So to the ones that came before you in our movements, thinking of Bernice Johnson Reagan, my ancestor and member of SNCC, but also to the ones who should not have gone before us, like Hind Rajab, who are all rooting for us and pushing us and demanding, right? Their ancestry demands that we do better, be better, take accountability, and move forward into a future that they deserved. Keep humming. I want you now to hum into the future on the front of your heart. So you're talking to the back of your heart. I want you to shift your focus now to the future that lives right at the edge of your breath. The thing you hope for and the thing that you long for. The thing that compels you every single day to get up, to move, to fight, to grieve, to make more space for the thing you know is possible. So that could be all of our kiddos who are coming out of childcare, the children who are yet to be known, the olive harvest that we all deserve to see in Palestine, all of it. The future we know is possible. Hum into that future now. to the living reality that Palestine will be free, Palestine is freeing us, the prefigurative vision that we have. We live now knowing that it is possible and it will be. Now I want you to keep that going, continue that hum, and I want you to center on this present moment. We spent some time at all the things, the causes and conditions, the people, right? The clarion calls that have brought us here, all the things that we hope for and long for, but now think about the breath you're breathing right now, this moment. And what you specifically have to offer and contribute that no one else has. We can't be the people on this stage, right? We can't be the Palestinian freedom fighters who we follow into their victory, right? But we can be exactly who we are in this moment. We can learn, we can grow from our mistakes. We can resource each other by saying what it is that we have to offer, what skills and our growing edges. So I want you to think about what it is that you contribute. What words, what encouragement, what resources, and what hope you have, because that's not for nothing. It's radical, tactical, it's highly strategic. So just breathe into this here and now that brought you here, all this good stuff. And I'm going to sing over this 5 times. Actually, I'm going to sing over this 7 times. Some words from Ruth Wilson Gilmore. And what I'd love for you to do is keep humming, but if you're compelled, once you hear it, start singing the melody that I'm going to sing. And when we end on the 7th one, that's it. We're going to go upstairs. Okay? So hum, and then when you get a hold of it, sing it with me. All right? Freedom, freedom is a place we make together. Freedom, freedom is a place we make together. 5 more. Freedom, freedom is a place we make together. Oh, now I say, freedom, freedom is a place we make together. 3 more times, oh, freedom, oh, freedom is a place we make together in our lifetime. Say, freedom, oh, freedom is a place we make together. Last time, as loud as you can. Freedom, oh, freedom.